agenda today, I set up a new poll for SQL on FHIR and Parquet. So take a look, and everybody please take a minute and go vote for that on Zulip. Otherwise, today, just want to go through the to-dos like we normally do, and then any walk-on topics that we want to discuss. So for the to-dos we had from last week, John and Arjun to coordinate on a stable invite and Zoom link. Still clearly a work in progress there. We'll get it right. CSV mode, profile and examples. Any progress on that?
Actually, I guess not. Sorry. I've been totally swamped with a totally unrelated project, but yeah, I'll get that.
No problem. Igor, wanted to have you follow up on FHIRPath branch for boundary functions. I think there was a branch in FHIRPath that we were considering incorporating. Any updates on that?
I actually haven't found it, the branch. So I looked through merge requests and haven't found any, but as you mentioned branches, I looked for a pull request or any issue on that, and there were literally no discussion on GitHub. So here's that, and as I can see, there are no branches either.
If I remember correctly, didn't Ryan point out, I can't remember if it was somebody else, but I thought it was you, Ryan, who, maybe it was you, John, I can't remember, suggested that we should go look for this. If anybody's on the call who recalls, maybe you could help out Igor. Maybe it was you, Josh, I don't know.
No, nobody remembers, so let's do it again. So what was the topic, like tests for boundary functions?
We don't have boundary functions right now in our reference implementation, and someone suggested to look FHIRPath.js branch where it was being developed. So right now there is no such functionality in branch.
The easiest way just to go to FHIRPath stream in Zulip and ask directly, guys, does anybody implemented it or not? They quite active in Zulip chat.
Well, that's sure an option.
If it's not, then this is a good task for Dmitry, our PhD student, to implement.
Yeah, can I say a little bit about boundary? I implemented low boundary and high boundary for time and data, and I added some extra tests to check any variation of existing way of data, and I found some mistakes. I fixed it already, but crucial problems that I face related how to determine date and data time. So if data and data time starts identically, like same, I try to use internal structures and through type info to get data or data time, but it returns 3, and now I don't know what to do.
Okay, we will help you, so it's just, I think, will work.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think next steps there is Igor ask the Zulip channel where any new code is, because we can't find it, and then...
If it's not implemented, so I would suggest like make some simple implementation in our engine. Maybe if somebody won't contribute to FHIRPath.js, like back.
Okay. I'm gonna let you, Dmitry, Nikolai, Igor, kind of work on what the next step is there.
All right.
How does that sound?
Yeah, but at least we can put like a goal so that like next meeting we will have some implementation of it somehow.
Okay. All right, I'll put that down. Next up, John, add line to spec that vRunner should support schema output. We've talked this one a couple of times.
Yeah, this one is still in progress.
Pending. Okay. Next one for you, John, as well. Create GitHub issue relating to decimal number issue on Zulip. Should change task to correct types with understanding will not apply to all implementations. I'm assuming this is also in progress.
Yeah, I did better than that. I made a pull request, so there's a pull request waiting for review there.
Great. All right. Sounds good. And then for me, scheduling poll agenda thread for Parquet and FHIR. So now is a great opportunity to go and vote in that poll so we can schedule in the next. I'm thinking of schedule. Oh, go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, there's a message in the lobby in the Zulip. It sounds like somebody might be waiting in the lobby.
Oh, okay. That looks like Angelo. Hold on.
Yeah.
All right, I'm letting him in.
So I think we're like months close to Connectathon, yeah?
Yep.
I don't know, John and Igor, do we have good test coverage for Connectathon? What do you think? Or maybe we should make some review and like contribute more tests.
Well, it's been a while since I looked at tests, and the last time I checked, it looked pretty decent. But maybe another to check out if nothing is missing is a good idea.
Yeah, I can spend a couple of hours and walk through tests. And John, what do you think? Is it comprehensive or not yet?
I think it's getting pretty close. I added another pull request as well around the column ordering, which was another sort of gap that I noticed. Not really, I'm not sure whether this relates to the reference implementation or not. I think it does, but I added in a test which uses the expect columns just so that that logic that we have in the spec is actually verified somewhere. So that's another pull request. And yeah, I think it's pretty good. I think I want to go through and just have one more sort of editorial look at it. But I guess we should talk what our goals are for the Connectathon. So what's the next step? Sort of how do we get this to a sort of 1.0 or like, you know, what's the next step? Is it like a ballot for comment? Is it like cutting a version and putting it somewhere?
Yeah, that's good. So what the definition of done? Yeah, at least like, yeah, we can walk through the tests, and like if more people, I don't know, maybe Josh, maybe Ryan can go, maybe Bashir as well, and let's kind of review. And the same for documentation. Yeah, so it could be like a trigger to get like more people walk through documentation and through tests and say that's finished. Yes, a process like this, like internal editorial work before we publish. I don't know how it's usually done. I don't know, Josh, is there any process to have like 5 editors or proofreaders? I don't know.
I mean, yeah, in some sense, there's a lot of process in the official HL7 workgroup territory. It's not always that meaningful, but there are checkpoints. So, one is sort of a set of quality criteria that are formally determined by the IG publisher tool. So our spec has a page in it called qa.html, which is already there, and maybe it has a bunch of errors and warnings in it. So like there's a formal process to go through all those and either fix them or document why they're okay. And that's an example of a sort of formal process check that exists in HL7 publication step. There's also, in that world, there's a formal review that happens during a ballot where, we invite the community to take a look and then officially address every issue that anybody raised. That doesn't mean we have to do what everybody asked for, but it means we have to consider each issue and make a formal decision about it, and then move ahead to publishing the specification once all those comments have been dealt with. So we could use as much of that process as we want in our own thinking. We can invite people to take a certain amount of time to review the spec, to share their feedback with us. I think that's sort of a reasonable thing to do, but I think we could also have a lighter weight process where we say, we're going to put out a release candidate 1 as soon as 3 of us are happy with the state of the spec. And then we can even just use that as the version that we'll go into dev days with and go into our Connectathon with. And then based on feedback from those, we can think about if we want to incorporate any new functionality or bug fixes into what we would call the version 1 publication.
I guess to me, like one advantage of sort of using the HL7 process, at least in terms of like a feedback collection device, is that we're potentially getting in front of a broader or different group of people than we've been in front of so far, which might have some value.
Yeah, I would love to organize initially like internal process, something like spreadsheet where every member of this group will go through documentation and say, okay, I read, here are 2 comments, yes. So at least this check will force us to read the documentation and provide feedback or say everything, for me, everything looks good, yeah. And the same, for example, for tests. And that could be the iteration number 1. So at least, yeah, like semi-formal stuff that we can create a spreadsheet or topic in a Zulip. So everybody will read the spec, go through tests and say, okay, I like this, or I created a couple of issues. And then let's try to do this iteration till the next meeting or something like this. And somehow organize, because, yeah, so everybody doing other stuff as well. Yeah, so if you know that you should go and read and put the checkbox that you read it, it will force you to do this, maybe. And Alex, you want to say something, yes?
It's not a huge deal. It's kind of like part of this. So I'm implementing both FHIR and a view runner, Parquet view runner in C++. So it's kind of my first time seeing all this. And I haven't gotten through all the unit tests. So I'm sure there's probably tests for this. But when you have 2 sibling selects next to each other, a lot of the tests in like basic, or kind of the first ones that I looked at, it didn't really show the cross-joining, like how that happens cross-joining wise. And it took me a bit to realize it happens on the per resource level. So like the wording in the multiple select expressions says sibling selects are effectively cross-joined. I thought that was kind of like do the selects for all resources on another and then cross-join them, but that's not the case. So I think just adding a little thing of, this cross-selection or cross-joined happens per resource might be just a helpful note for implementers as well.
Can you start this comment as a GitHub issue or?
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that'll
this
be
is a
useful. Go ahead, John.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, yeah, it's a tricky thing to articulate. That's one of the reasons we created that processing model page, because there's a few things like that, like the fine semantics of it, which are a little bit difficult to explain in the prose of the notes bit. So the processing model is sort of like an algorithmic description of how you would do it theoretically. Whether that processing model has the right amount of prominence within the spec, or whether we could add additional words to the main section, I think probably. So yeah, we definitely need to go through your feedback in a little bit more detail, and I think there's some changes to make there.
Yeah.
But where is the processing model? I haven't seen that yet.
It's under
So if you-
implementer guidance.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I didn't read this. Probably should.
I think my functional model was in Zulip and it wasn't migrated, yes, to spec. Yeah, I can bring another version of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Because
I
to be
don't
honest, yeah, we were working with a designer. We are just doing open source view definition designer now. And I spent like a couple of days to describe this algorithm. Yeah, so I think, yeah, we need kind of proofread the description of the algorithm, because it wasn't so easy. The designer was with some technical background, but it took a lot of time. And finally, the functional model, what works best, because I've tried like to skip and make some simplification, but when I said, okay, you have 4 functions and they combine this way, and after some explanation, he finally got it.
Yeah, on its own, it's just kind of a tricky thing. So putting it in English is not.
I don't know, biased a little bit because we're discussing this for a year, yeah. So, and for us, it looks clear, yes, but maybe it's completely not the case for the newcomers.
Yeah, I think that's a big value in Alex and other folks who are trying to implement to go through this. Yeah, I suggested Alex do open a GitHub issue, but I probably should have suggested like tagging folks too, or adding a Zulip thread, because it's better visibility, because folks aren't looking at the sub issues every day probably at this point. I did want to ask you, Nikolai, about the functional model. I remember from your Connectathon talk, you that was the first time I was seeing that, and I really liked it, particularly for implementers. And so it's not in the spec now, right? But is that
You can work on this with ChatGPT and make some version of it. So if people like it, yeah. So I think I published it in Zulip. So, and yeah,
Okay.
I will expand it a little bit and then like create an issue with this, and maybe Ryan or add to documentation. I don't know the right place, because for now we have, I think, what Josh described, algorithm. Yes.
Yeah, that's all I see in here, and I wasn't sure if I missed it or not. I mean, it's not a big spec, but I didn't see it anywhere else. I remember I was like, oh, I really like that, and I haven't seen it anywhere else. So I think that is a place where we might have an addition to the spec. And now that I'm thinking about it, I wrote up, this is a couple of months ago, a glossary as well. So that might be a nice addition to the spec if people agree to harmonize around a common language. So we might have a couple of like actual content additions here. I'm happy to help guide some of that. I know Ryan has really been taking the charge there as well. So Ryan and I, that could be a task for Ryan and I to, incorporate any additions to spec, modifications. Yeah. And if everybody good with that? Yeah, I think that's something we can work out with the group or on Zulip. I tend to think it has a lot of value. And I think I mentioned to you, Alex, when you were talking about implementation. So that would definitely be something to look at as well, even if it's not in the spec at this point. Cool. So that all sounds good to me. I made a note for Nikolai to at least add the functional model to spec in a PR. I will do the same for the glossary that I developed. I just wanted to go back process-wise to Nikolai's suggestion of putting up sort of a sheet with folks' names around it to organize the process of just review of the documentation and the specs. How do people feel about that, just process-wise? I think similar to what we did about the FHIR path subset. You can always just ignore it if you don't. All right, I will put that on me to take on and put together a sheet just to organize some of this review process with a little bit more formality. So in terms of John's question, what's the next step for milestone 1? It sounds like from the group, so editorial work on the spec over the next, let's say, a couple of weeks into any edition, have folks walk through the spec content and the tests. And then, at that point, I think we could probably be at a good point to make a decision and say, okay, we feel good about this being a milestone 1 release that we would put at some fixed URL, not necessarily go through the HL7 process at that point. But I think that gives us kind of a last check-in, or at least I'm suggesting that as a process. John.
So is there any plan to use the connectathon to socialize this somehow? So we're talking about getting it to sort of a level of, maturity by the connectathon. Is there anything we can do at the connector to socialize it or get further feedback?
Any thoughts from the group on that?
Maybe we can join some tracks which can leverage SQL on FHIR.
Yeah, now that I'm thinking of it, I don't think we have not set, did we set up a track?
No, so we should.
I can't remember if we did.
Yeah,
or not.
that's true. We don't have a track because recently we were talking with somebody and he said, I don't see a track on it. So we should go and set up the track. Yeah. And then see on other tracks and maybe we can make some feed together.
Angela?
Yeah, I was just because there's no track that I could find either. I mean, we just decided to go to Connectathon, but I'm going to go there for another project as well, the Digital Quality Implementers project, which is trying to kind of harmonize CQL and all that. But one thing I was going to try to do there, I guess that's more raising awareness in general for SQL on FHIR. I don't think it's like trying to push any of this particular stuff forward with the spec. But what I was going to try to show the group there is that and this is super experimental. I don't even know how this is going to work. But one of the things I've been working on is taking view definitions and injecting them as CQL imports. So you can import a view definition into CQL and just kind of show them, hey, look, you can bidirectionally treat an SQL query as if it's inside of CQL. And then conversely, I do the same thing when I generate. One of the things I've been doing is when we generate CQL, we generate our own, it was our own proprietary view because there was nothing. So we made our own way of describing a view. And we're now starting to emit views so that you can say, okay, this condition resource is actually a view with these columns. So I know I was just kind of trying to show that group that there's more than one way to do this, and look, maybe they can interchange. I don't know how much that is going to be there, but that was kind of my thought, is into that track, kind of have that conversation. I know that's just a general awareness thing. I figured that's probably good.
Yeah, that's cool. And for social stuff, John, so maybe we can book the room and invite other people to review what we did with SQL on FHIR. We should talk with the organizers, but I think something like this is possible. So just put it on a schedule, say, okay, so the last day in the evening, we're gonna get together and we will quickly overview what we have in SQL on FHIR, and you can ask any questions. During Connectathon, we can walk and say, guys, do you know? Tomorrow, we're gonna talk about SQL on FHIR, something like this. Because I think we did kind of similar session ad hoc, yes, on the last Connectathon. So we can pre-schedule session like this.
Yeah, I mean, we, the last, sort of officially, it wasn't like an official track, but we talked to the organizers obviously and set up specific calls. But apparently, this time around, I think it just kind of went by us. We were obviously working on the dev days tracks as well. So I'm not quite sure what we can do at this point.
That's kind of different, slightly different folk, yes? So I mean that some working group who are interested in SQL on FHIR can come and ask any questions.
So you could just get it put on the agenda of something else, so there's plenty of sort of related tracks going on. You could inquire with a couple of them whether there's sort of a spot in the agenda to talk about this and how it might relate to the other work that's going on.
There's another question. Who is going to Connectathon? So John, you will miss it, yes? So
yeah, I won't be able to go, but I'm happy to support if there's any work that needs to be done around the edges and despite my time zone.
And who is going? I know, Arjun, let's raise the hands.
I will be at the event, but probably focused on the Smart Health Cards track.
Okay.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make the May Connectathon. I'll be at the Dev Days in FHIR, so hope to see everyone then, but I have a conflict with it.
Okay, so we will have a half of team.
Yeah, Dan, I think, is doing, if I'm not mistaken, bulk FHIR next generation track. So he's going to be, I think that's one thing he's been preoccupied with. So it might be a smaller group from us, and definitely should be a social. I think that the action item here is find another track glom onto in some sense, or connect with. So I think that's a question out for the group to think about who might be a good candidate. I mean, if Dan is doing bulk fire, he might be able to give us some times and put it on the agenda. We can certainly ask if that could fit into the schedule for Dan.
Yeah, but at least yes. So let's claim our track, yes, and maybe some session like.
I can talk to Sandy and say what's available if that's good for everyone. I don't know, but I can do that. All right, and we'll have the whole. I'll at least email Sandy and see what's available right now, and then I think for the whole group to find another track or other interested people to potentially host us for some time or get people interested. That sound like the right actions? Okay, all right, let's see here. Anything else on spec work over the next couple of weeks, or the Connectathon or Dev Days?
I'm curious, Alex said he is working on Parquet and C++ implementation. Can you tell more?
Yeah, certainly. I am actually Dev Days presentation on this as well. It's a shorter one. But so I started doing that, and I made a deserializer in C++ for FHIR, and I generated my own structs to match. I pulled in the structure definitions, made the structs, and had the deserializer go from JSON to the structs, and I then marshal it to the FHIRly implementation of FHIR stuff, and I compared the two. I think mine is like 6 times faster currently if you have to marshal to the C#, but I think it's like I can do 0.5 gigabyte per second deserialization in C++ deserializer, which is a good amount faster than other implementations that I've found. So yeah, I just want to present on that. And now that I'm building these tools to work with C++, you can imagine like embedded programming where your medical devices create and generate FHIR rather than having to go into a proprietary format, then convert to FHIR. So you could really just start building and using FHIR all the way from the bottom for like your lab tests. And then you can get rid of a lot of complexities of converting just the raw data. Like a health monitor might check your BPM, and then that's just automatically in FHIR, goes in data table, and you don't have to do any conversion there either. Yeah, so I think I'll talk about those 2 points. I don't have too much time. And then I'll probably touch on, I'm starting to do a view runner where we could have bulk conversion from JSON FHIR to Parquet file, and then you can use that wherever you use a Parquet file. So that's a goal, at least.
Yeah, that's amazing. So
thank you. Yeah.
And with where you're going from the bulk fire to sort of a view runner, being able to run a view runner over it, do you actually go through the object models? So when you take that bulk ND-JSON, do you bring it through a parser into like objects before you query it or put it into Parquet, or do you sort of skip that part?
No, I do have to deserialize it into memory. I can't do it in one pass. I'm not sure if that's your question, but I deserialize it into the C++ structs, and then this is a whole other thing. I also have to make a FHIR path implementation because there isn't one in C++. So that's like, I'm doing the subset of FHIR path that I need. So you can do that, execute the view definitions using the FHIR path. It gives you the resources that match, and then you feed that into your Parquet file. Is that the question?
Yeah, so I didn't articulate very well. So the way we do it in Pathling is we use the happy path to bring it out of FHIR into sort of objects, and then we use that to plug it into row. And the performance of that isn't terrible, but it's not amazing either. And we've been thinking about ways that we can short circuit that, but it's a bit of a trade-off, because if you create another solution for that, then you have to re-implement a whole bunch of sort of FHIR specification semantics in order to do that. And then that makes it just a whole lot more code and a lot more sort of maintenance burden. But the other this is also relevant to the Parquet discussion as well, because depending on which sort of use cases we want to think about there, it could be things like Parquet as an interchange format and that sort of stuff. And there's different options that come into the frame if you have something like that.
Yeah, so I guess theoretically, depending on how slow or whatever you're using is, you could use the C++ deserializer run the fire path like a series of hits, and then then you'd have to deserialize it into whatever deserializer you're using, into whatever language that is. So then JSON's still the interchangeable format, but the Parquet might be more compressed and it might be easier to, read from, depending on what your end goal is. But yeah, the goal for the Parquet is to have like a simple executable you could either run from the command line or use from a DLL, and just say, here's some input, here's the things, give me the output, and simple without having to, use a certain language.
This kind of reminds me of like the new state of the art for this kind of thing, parsing JSON as fast as you can parse it, is, I don't know if you guys have heard of this paper, SIMD-JSON. Have you heard of that?
That's what I'm using, yeah.
SIMD-JSON, okay. Yeah, so SIMD-JSON allows you to avoid creating structs. You don't have to create your own structures at all, because what it's doing is it takes a pass and it generates basically a symbol table of where everything is. Just the positions, it remembers the positions of everything. So what you can do, John, is basically parse it with SIMD-JSON. It remembers all the positions, and you query it with like a path-like syntax where you'll tell it, I want the address dot whatever, and it will get you it'll go locate it because it knows where the positions of everything are. And that what's nice about that is it does two things. The two big innovations here. One is it took from Linux's zero copy method, because that's how Linux kind of just pushes the pointer of files around, not files. The second thing that makes it awesome is it uses SIMD. So if you're running on at this point, anything, any AMD or Intel chip, it will parse it, based on how wide the SIMD channel is, which is big. So you get like really huge advantage. I don't think there's anything faster than that on the planet. It's like 4 gigs.
I think it's almost up to 7 now. They've done even more, and it's insane. So my thing actually slows it down quite a bit if I get half a gig. So I have to look into that more. But I've done.
Yeah, I bet we can write a FHIR path to directly talk to that, and you don't need the structs at all. And then that would be as fast as you could possibly get it.
That'd be pretty cool. That'd be really cool, actually. Just the ordering of how I did things is why I'm using the structs. But that's definitely a cool next step if you can pull directly.
Yeah, one of my crazy thought was like generating a Zig program from view definition, and then like dead code elimination and all the stuff.
Right.
Yeah, so a lot of interesting stuff we can do. Yeah, and that's nice to see like hardcore guys like C++. That's
I mean, it's I wonder whether this sort of thing could be used to actually improve Happy, and I'm wondering what the sort of slowest part of that process is. Is it the rules around the parsing? Because there's sort of a minimal level of parsing that Happy uses to just get it into objects. So that want to make that level as minimal as possible, and then you can layer on validation optionally.
Sorry to jut in, but totally possible, because I did it with the FHIR. You can marshal it to Java objects. I did it so you marshal it to FHIR. And I think it's 6 times faster than the Ostrich engine. So I'm sure maybe you could get some speed increase for Happy. I haven't done it though, but I think it's definitely possible to give it a try.
The one big problem you're going to find with Happy is that the memory pressure on the JVM is really high. And even if we can make the parsing unparsing process fast, you're going to just run into the limit that Happy's going to run to. Now, IBM, I remember, but they abandoned it, I think. But they made a version that was way faster because it was very judicious on how it created objects. So it had good JVM pressure capability, but then they abandoned it. So I don't know. I think something like this might be very interesting because, if you could make a C, I'm almost thinking the non-happy FHIR path is to say, take something like this and use a Jython wrapper or something around it. And then you're able to talk to the objects directly, and you give it FHIR path. And so to Java, that would look great. I mean, we wouldn't care that we're not actually talking to objects. We just think we are. That would be pretty interesting.
Yeah, to be honest, in our Clojure implementation, we're using Jackson IST directly, and I play it with some lazy parsers, like you described, which are just keeping the binary string and some set of pointers. They fail if you finally walk around the whole object, so they becoming slower. But if you're only picking some parts of it, like 5% 1%, they could be extremely fast, because so there's not only like having like binary string and pointers, but sometimes lazy parsers, so they don't even parse the branch if it's not requested. That may work for view definition because you probably don't need the whole resource, but that's a very like this is a rabbit hole, all of this type of optimizations.
Yeah, but they're big. I mean, they add up. I mean, if you can, because the problem with FHIR is if you want to load 1 million patients, you're in the terabyte.
Yeah.
So, and actually, if you were to pluck out the stuff inside of a query, like SQL, for example, if you take one of the big measures and you pluck it out, you're only looking at like 150. Well, you're looking at somewhere between 150 megs and a couple gigs for 1 million patients. That's it. And we have to go through a terabyte to get to that. That's the painful part. And so anything that can help us rip through it is helpful, but
if it's a starting format is, let's say, Parquet, so then things getting more interesting because this predicate push down, or how it's called, technology, so it can read only information you really need. And I know they're more efficient, like arrow format, so even better.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, more to come from us on this. I mean, it's a use case that we're, starting to confront us, right? Sort of data set size, as we start to have people run, our measure engines on real world data. It's the data volume problem is really coming to the fore. So that's one of the reasons why we're looking at things like what Alex is talking about in terms of, binary formats, Parquet, using those powers. So it's really coming from a real world use case for us. So I see we're just at time now. And so, okay, good conversation, everybody.
I think Bashir want to say something. Yeah, Bashir.
Did you want to say something, Bashir?
Well, very quickly. I mean, it wasn't. So I just wanted to point out, especially since Alex was talking about Parquet, that we have like a Parquet session coming up, starting discussing their schema. So that's probably very relevant. So please try to attend that as well.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I saw the ZSV is nice stuff. Okay.
All right. Okay, I think we're at the end. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
See you next week.
Everybody.